According to Business Insider, millions of Americans could see big hikes in their insurance premiums right before the November election. Wow, what is going on here? Well, let's talk to my healthcare expert. Paul Seegert's back on the Newsmaker line. Paul, welcome back to Iowa Radio. Good morning.
Good morning, Jeff. How are you?
I am amazed, Paul, to read this story. Just thinking about all the elements that's going to lead us into the next election. Why is there a potential health insurance hike on the horizon?
Well, what happened was we built into some of the rescue plan legislation or rescue legislation during COVID, we built in a bunch of subsidies, but in order to get them passed, the subsidies had a sunset clause. So they're going to end. Some of them only last as long as there is a public health emergency in place or some of the conditions that are creating the situation. And then others were subsidies that were scheduled to end at the end of this calendar year. So you have a couple of things happening there, but at a high level, we increased enrollment from 2020 to 2022 from 27.1 million to 35.8 million in some form of either government-provided coverage or subsidized coverage on an exchange.
Paul, I feel like this is going to be a story you and I are just going to talk about endlessly in the future. Am I right? I mean, one of the things that is a part of the Affordable Care Act is nonstop subsidies. Am I right? Yep.
Yeah. And the thing is, what they try to do is they want to make them permanent, but the price tag to do so is just, that's not a number that's as easy to pass as a temporary subsidy. So then they have to come back to the table and try and pass it again or fund it for a longer period of time. And one of the things to me that's really interesting about this story is that we took folks that are getting some form of subsidy, whether it's full or partial, from 27.1 to 35.8 million, but we only decreased the uninsured numbers in this country by 4.9 million. So we added a bunch of people, but we moved quite a few who were already covered somewhere else. When we created moral hazard. We created a situation where it was even possible for a 60-year-old couple making north of $200,000 a year to get some subsidy.
Yeah.
And so you drew them onto these government programs away from employer coverage, away from other individual coverage that they may have had and that they were affording because you made it a better deal to get on the government's bill.
So, Paul, as long as we're talking about, you're right on with this. Like, you can't just make the subsidies permanent. That's not politically feasible. And you can also, it seems to me, sort of hide the true cost of the program and really answer the tough questions about it. Because I think something that you said there was just really key, which was, look, the politicians said this, but ultimately what happened is you allowed couples making $200,000 a year to move on to government subsidized health insurance. It seems like the way that the government does this, they're avoiding the tough political questions about what we actually did, aren't they?
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. They said nobody's going to spend more than 8.5% of their income on health insurance premiums, so come to the exchange and we'll give you a subsidy. They removed the 400% of poverty level rule. So there was no top end in a sense to those who could get a subsidy. And that created this situation. And then they also said, if you're a state, you're not going to audit the people that are on your Medicaid program. So during these public health emergencies, so some people believe that that's why the public health emergency continues to get extended related to COVID. COVID was kind of cover to extend to let people get into some of these programs that might not have qualified or might not continue to qualify. Normally, a state is going to audit. You have to re-qualify at regular intervals. And if maybe now you've gotten reemployed and you have coverage available to your employer or your income has grown to a certain level, then you don't qualify for that program anymore. There are lots of folks, like 14.4 million could be kicked off the Medicaid programs in the country, but that sounds, on the one hand, it sounds like, wow, why would we kick people off these programs? On the other hand, there are folks that aren't qualifying anymore.
Right.
They now have a higher income or whatever. And the states, when the public health emergency ends, they're no longer going to get additional funding from the federal level to cover this. So then it's all on them, and that's a huge, huge budgetary item for states.
Absolutely. So, Paul, going back to the initial question about the possibility of huge increases before the fall election, I would assume Democrats will not allow that to happen. Probably they'll find some temporary spending bill and put the subsidies back in. What are your thoughts?
That certainly is going to be a really high priority because the political timing of that's going to be bad. Could influence also the extension of a public health emergency to kind of keep people on these programs, even despite the fact they may no longer qualify, so they don't all get booted off right before. And it's not so much that premiums are going to rise as the fact that you may no longer qualify for a subsidized plan, so now you have to spend more on a different plan.
And nobody wants that before an election. Yeah.
No.
Managing partner of PCS Advisors, always a great voice on these topics, Paul Seegert, my guest. Paul, thanks very much for talking to me today.